But let's jump right in here. And we're only talking defense. And I will also say true freshmen are off the board. That's a different show. That's a different show because I did have a couple true freshmen. And I was like, okay, let's talk about, you're like, different show.
And we had to weed them out somehow. And so as we thought like about future shows we have coming down, like, okay, I don't want to talk about Justin Adamiola in 8 different shows.
Yeah.
Right. And like Jason Adamiola is already getting talked about a second time because we just talked about him in the disrespected players. So like we won't spend as much time on that. So we're just trying not to get repetitive with guys. So that way we kind of broke them into different shows. So we'll have some of that stuff. Because the freshman class on defense is going to be very interesting, Vince, because both of your freshmen were on, obviously, the freshmen that you had are both guys that you look at and say, well, this kid could be playing a ton by the end of the year.
Exactly.
That's the very definition of this breakout. But we're going to put them in more of a different show. So
like freshman breakouts or something along those lines.
Yeah, who's going to be freshman impact players? I mean, that's really what it boils down to, right?
There's going to be some on both sides of the ball, I would imagine. So,
yeah.
Okay, so let's go defense. We're going to start with one that is on both of our lists. Also, I would say the most unsurprising member of this list would be linebacker Marist Liufau. Mm-hmm. He's on both of our lists. He was a no-brainer. He was the second person I put on my list. He is, and I was struggling because we kind of talked about the tiers, right? You've got not playing at all to being a rotation player, maybe a rotation player to being a starter being a star. He doesn't really fit in any one of those 3 categories because he didn't play last year, but he was penciled in as a starter. So I kind of put him in the first tier of starter about to be a star.
I mean, he's the most interesting guy on the list, Vince, because he's going to potentially go from having like never started a game in his career to not playing at all last year to what we think is a guy that has a chance to be a really, really difference maker in this Notre Dame defense. I mean, and that's why it was like a no-brainer that he was going to, like you said, it was a no-brainer he was going to be on this list, just the very definition of it. Not that he's necessarily going to be their best player, but like, if there's other guys we're going to talk about that, they were really good, pretty good players last year that we think are going to kind of take that next level. If Marist is a guy that has 80-plus tackles and 7 tackles for loss and 2 sacks, that's a breakout season for him. I mean, so like it's easy to throw him into this category. The question for me, Vince, and I think the more intriguing aspect of this conversation is putting Marist Liufau in a breakout category after what he's kind of done the last couple of years, which is, show flashes. But again, he didn't start over Shane Simon in 2020. Last year, he didn't play at all. I'm looking at his tackle numbers for 2020 when he was a good rotation player. He had 22 tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, a half a sack.
Yeah.
Right. I think the more intriguing aspect, Vince, and what I'll ask you first is, okay, it's easy to put him in the breakout category, but what level of breakout are we thinking is going to go into? Because he's going to go from doing nothing, sitting out last year, being nothing but like a rotation player in 2020 to a starter and a guy that people are predicting is going to be a good player at Notre Dame at the very least.
Sure.
What's the degree to the breakout that you're predicting for him this year? And I have some ideas I'll share afterwards, but I really want to kind of let you kick this off with Marist is, okay, breakout, easy. What's the degree? What kind of player are you projecting and predicting that Marist is going to be this year?
So here's a very specific prediction for you, okay? Notre Dame obviously kicks things off September 3rd. They've got 4 games in the month of September. They've got, obviously Ohio State away, Marshall and Cal at home, North Carolina away, and then they kick off October. They have a bye, and then they kick off October in Vegas, right? And Vegas is going to be a huge game. Obviously, it's going to be on NBC and all of those different things, okay? But coming off of a bye, it's almost like I don't want to say you hit the reset button, but you do to a degree, okay? Here's my prediction for Marist. I think he is going to be singled out in the pregame show for the BYU game, October 8th, as the heartbeat of this defense. I think they're going to be like, wow, where did this kid come from? And he's leading the nation in this, and he's doing this, and he's flying all over the football field, and all of these different things. I think they do like a little story on him leading up to the BYU game on October 8th. I think after 4 games, we're going to know who Marist Liufau is and what he can do for this defense. And I think they are going to go as he goes. And I think by October 8th, the country is going to see that.
So you're going not just that he's going to be a starter and a good player, but he's going to be a star. I mean, you're
Yes,
thrusting him all into the
I
star
am.
category.
Yeah. Maybe that's a bold take at this point.
Well, I mean, that's
I
what
think
this show's about, right?
I think he's got the tools, man. I think
Right.
he's got the demeanor. I think that he has enough of the flash plays as well that people want to see, that, and the NBCs and the ESPNs of the world like latch onto. I think he's going to have a few of those in the first 4 games. And so I think it's going to be easy to point him out and be like, let's do something on him to lead off this huge game in Vegas against BYU.
For me, Vince, I don't disagree with anything you said in regards to what Marist can be. I'm just not quite ready yet to throw him into that star category simply because I just need to see him be a starter first. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So that's kind of where some of my hesitancy is in that regard. But I feel the same excitement you do, Vince. I get excited about the same thing. It's just with him, it's because of the injury last year and because of, the fact that what we don't know yet is, does he have the discipline from an assignment standpoint to be that kind of player? And I think that's really the holdup I still have for Marist. And the only question is just coming from the standpoint of we just haven't seen him do a whole lot. 22 tackles in 2020. I mean, he showed some athleticism in the Bama game. And I think, was it you that I was talking about yesterday, Vince, talking about the first half? No, Sean. I was talking to Sean yesterday, 2 days ago. Sean Davis and I were talking about this. And he was talking about how he just was going back and watching the ACC championship game. And he just was talking about how Marist just flashed so much with his athleticism. That's another game you saw. You saw it in the North Carolina game. You saw flashes of it. But the issue that he had the last time we saw him was he would do some plays where athletically, Vince, he's like, God, that dude can flat out run. Yeah. We haven't seen a guy that can run like that since Jalen Smith was here, right?
Right, absolutely.
But then you kind of flip it like, wow, he was about 4 gaps off on that play, right? You know what I mean? Like, why is he running there when the ball's going here,
Yeah.
That could just be normal inexperience, and but the only thing is that's all we've seen. We haven't seen that guy. So those are the big things for me is if he can – combine the flip side is you become more disciplined and then you lose your aggressiveness. You lose your instincts. You lose your playmaking ability. I think that's kind of what we saw from Shane Simon. Really athletic player, but just didn't know how to, just was so focused on this is what I'm supposed to do that he couldn't play fast, couldn't play loose. Yeah. I have a hard time thinking Marist Liufau is going to do that.
Right.
Just because of the way he plays, and even just what we saw from him in the spring game, to your point about being a playmaker. I mean, the big interception, he sniffs out that screen to Michael Mayer. He jumps the pass.
Right.
It's thrown over his head. He's right there because he sniffed it out. So if he can become a more disciplined player from what we saw the last time he was on the field in a game, I don't disagree because I think the will position in this defense is going to be geared towards being a playmaker position.
Right. Absolutely.
And then the other thing that we were told last year is that he was their best pass rusher in camp before he got hurt. So how are they going to use that part of his role? And because there was a lot of times J.D. Bertrand came free on blitzes last year and was really close to hitting home.
Just didn't.
Either didn't quite get there or he missed because he lacks the length.
Sure.
We think he's going to be much better at the mic than he was as a will. Marist won't have those similar problems. He's faster than J.D. He's more explosive than J.D., which is saying a lot because J.D. is a pretty darn good athlete.
Absolutely.
But he's way longer than J.D., which is going to eliminate some of that, how the length caused some problems. So I think his usage is certainly going to be there. The question I also have is can he play 60 snaps a game to have enough of the production to do what you're talking about? I think that's the other thing he has to answer, Vince, is we also haven't seen him play a ton of snaps. So all the tools are there. I think if he can put it all together, there's no doubt in my mind that Marist Liufau can be. Because what you're talking about, Vince, is you're talking about him being an All-American caliber player. And that's what you're talking about.
Yeah,
so you're talking about 90-plus tackles, 10-plus tackles for loss, 4 or 5 sacks, multiple interceptions, and then also making plays in big moments, right? That's going to be the key.
Absolutely.
You can't be that kind of difference maker if you're just putting up numbers. Numbers only tell part of the story. Absolutely. Are you making game-changing plays? And I think at the end of the day, that's what I fall down to. I think Marist has a chance to not just put up numbers, he has the kind of skill to make game-changing plays. And,
Mhm.
and that's the thing that if you can add that to the second level of the defense, what's the one thing more than anything else this defense was missing in 2020?
That's it right there. Finishing the big plays. And
A
that's
playmaker
yeah.
at the second level of the defense.
And I think they were in position last year to make big plays. I just don't think that they executed it all the way through. I think there was a lot of that going on, a lot of missed tackles in the backfield. I think that there's going to be opportunities for big plays. I think Marist gets them, and that's what I was referring to when I was talking about doing that piece, right? At the beginning of the BYU game, he's going to have some flash plays where those are game-changing type plays. I think he's going to have those. And I also think, and I wanted to add this to kind of what you were talking about, things that we haven't seen, right? Because he was injured all of last year. I think being out last year could have really helped him from a mental side of the game. You talked about being 4 gaps in the wrong place, right? Or just flying around with your hair on fire and things of that nature. I think being able to take a step back, forcibly so. I mean, he didn't have a choice, but taking a step back, seeing the game from the sideline as a former starter, right? I mean, but being in the room, being on the sidelines, watching film for a whole year, I think that's going to be huge to his maturity level. I think it's going to be huge to his maturation process on the field as well. So I think that's going to be good for him. Now, I would have loved to see him on the field last year, mistakes and all, but I think being out benefited him greatly, and we're going to see it this year. And I will also speak to the fact that my biggest question mark, and I will echo what you said, is how many snaps a game is he going to be effective? What is that number? And I think that's something the coaching staff is going to have to figure out, to be honest with you. Where's that sweet spot for Marist, right?
For all the linebackers. I think that's going to be the challenge.
And I think that's a good point, because we talked about this the other day, the depth or it was Ryan and I, when we were talking about the position groups, right? We were talking about linebackers, and we talked about the depth and how deep this linebacking core is for the first time in a while, frankly. And so the coaches are going to have options, and they're going to be able to find those sweet spots for guys as far as plays and series and all of those different things. And I don't want to spoil it or anything, but one of my honorable mention guys was Prince Collie. And I think he's going to get an opportunity behind Marist once they find that sweet spot. And you're not going to see a whole lot of drop off.
Honestly, the presence of guys like Prince Collie and Bo Bauer and Jalen Sneed and Nolan Ziegler and Junior Tuihalamaka and players like that, Jordan Patelho, is why I didn't even consider another linebacker on this list. Simply because standpoint is, for example, I think Jack Kaiser is going to be a better player this year than he was last year. He was a solid player last year.
Right.
And he was the only guy at linebacker that really did make any game-changing plays. I mean, his pick 6 against Wisconsin put that game away. You know, I mean, the second pick 6 was more about Isaiah Foskey, and he was just kind of there. But, you know, Jack made some plays last year. Sure. But the thing about him is he going to play enough because of the different type of nickel looks they're going to show with a 5th DB, rotating with other players, whether it's Jordan Patelho or Jalen Sneed or somebody else. You know, is he going to play enough to have the jump in production to be considered a breakout? You know, can JD Bertrand, is he going to play enough at Mike, even if he's the starter, to improve on the production he had last year if he's rotating with Bo and Junior Tuihalamaka, right?
That's going to be tough.
And so Marist is the easy one to put because he didn't play last year and he only had 22 tackles the year before.
Right.
But that would be the only thing that kind of keeps me from, you know, was he really going to have that, like I said, that other production is how much he's going to play. And not just because of his volume, but also because you have a lot of other guys you want to play. But I have a feeling that Marist Liufau is going to be the one linebacker that they just have a hard time taking off the field. That's kind of my thought on him
you're right. You're absolutely right. But it's going to make it, I think it's going to make it easier to get him off the field at times because of Prince Collie. I think he's going to be one heck of a backup, and he's going to force his way on the field, not as a starter. And I don't expect him to be a starter, but I expect him to force his way on the field. You know what I mean? Just like last year in fall camp, we were watching Marist make all these plays, but JD was right behind him, making a ton of plays. We're like, okay, he's going to force his way on the field, and he's going to be really good. Now, he ended up having to start and led the team in tackles, right? And so that's why I brought up this question from Call Me Ty. I think it fits right in with what we're talking about, Brian. He says, another question, does the will position leave him in spots to make these plays? We've seen it at Rover in the past.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We only saw it Rover in the past because of a dude named Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah.
Right.
I'm not saying that to be disrespectful. I'm just saying, like, he got a level of production out of that rover position that's unique and rare.
Exactly.
He just was a special player. But if you look at last year, for example, you don't have a Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah at rover, and all of a sudden that production is more normal for that position. Again, Jack Kaiser did some good things last year, but his production compared to Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah is not nowhere in the same ballpark because it's different players and different usages. And, there were times Jack wasn't on the field as part of sub packages, but Jeremiah never came off the field, right? That's the reality of it. But then you look at, so then you get back to what it's normally going to look like. And guess who led the team in tackles last year? It was J.D. Bertrand. And as I pointed out in the show the other day with was it with you, Ryan? Yeah, Vince, when we were doing the disrespected players, you were talking about J.D. Bertrand was one of your disrespected players. I went back and looked and it was like Jalen Smith, Manti Te'o, and then like Tavon Coney were like the only three guys to have more solo tackles in a year than J.D. Bertrand had last year.
Right.
And they were like by a couple. They were all in the 60s. He was at 63. They were all kind of like right there. It wasn't like, they had 80. They had like 64, 66. It was stuff like that. And so that's a position that's going to produce a lot. You look at what Osmar Bilal did in 2019 as a starting will. When he had a bunch of tackles, 10 tackles for loss, 79 tackles, 10 tackles for loss as part of a rotation. You look at the production that Drew Tranquil had in 2018, playing that position, the impact plays that he had, that season, 86 tackles, 9 tackles for loss, three and a half sacks, 4 pass breakups, and then also missed some time that year, got hurt early against Navy, played very little against Northwestern, which tamped down what his production would have been if he had a healthy 13-game season. So, and then, of course, Jalen Smith with the 2 years he had as the playmaker. So just in most defenses, the Will or Mike is going to be more of the volume playmaker role unless you get a Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah. That's just the nature of that position. So I think that's where you look at it and say, hey, that's so yeah, to answer your question, the Will position is that. And it's because one of the other questions that Call Me Ty had, Vince, was about, will he be best at pass rushing, run defense, and coverage? And my answer was yes. Because that's the whole point, right? That's the unique aspect of the Will, is the Will more than any other position has to be utilized as a inside the box run stuffer, as a guy that can blitz off the edge and blitz through gaps from the second level. And then also as a guy that's going to be tasked with much more challenging coverage responsibilities, where the Mike is more running backs and occasionally a tight end up the seam if he's number 3. The Will at times is going to be running with wheel routes. He's going to be running with slots. He's going to be running, getting up underneath the W type receivers and plays like that. The Will has the really challenging responsibilities and coverage. The Rover does as well, but the Rover's not asked to be as much of an inside the box run defender compared to the Will. So I think the way in which that position has to be utilized and will be utilized is one of the things that I look at and say, that's why I believe that that Marist is going to be in position to have a big jump in production. And if he can be disciplined within, but that's also why the discipline is a concern, because of how much the Will is asked to do. Does the production get masked by giving up big plays? Those are the things that you have to ask yourself. But he's going to at very least be a really good player this year. Now we find out if he can be a game changer. And Vince, it sounds like from you that your prediction is you think as long as he stays healthy and that kind of thing, that he's going to break out as a game changer type
yes,
player.
No question about it. I think he's going to have, because look, JD from the exact same position led the team in tackles last year, and I think we both agree, and anybody that watched enough games, that he left tackles out on the field, right? And some of the ones that he left out,
just because his length,
saying, because of the ones that he left out on the field, I think Marist makes those plays, right? Now, are there plays that JD made that maybe Marist? Well, okay, sure, but I just feel like there's going to be plenty of opportunities from that position. His position does not scare me away from predicting what he can do this year. It almost enhances what I think he can do this year, because the Will allows you to move around a little bit more and come off the edge and do some different things that you wouldn't be able to do at Mike, to be honest with you. So I'm excited about what Marist can be. I think he's going to be a massive breakout player. I mean, going from not even playing at all last year because of injury, granted, but to being one of the centerpieces of this defense. That's what I'm excited about.